This is episode 75 of the After Gambling podcast. And in this episode, Matt Smith joins the show to share his story. Hey there, and welcome to the After Gambling podcast. My name is Jamie. I'm a former problem gambler. Now I haven't gambled in nearly 10 and a half years. And I do this little podcast to share not only my story, but the story of so many others to help people that may be struggling with a gambling addiction, or may have a friend or family member struggling with a gambling addiction, to better understand it and to address it so you can get to a life after gambling. And today I have someone else that's joined the show to share his story. So without further ado, here's the chat I had with Matt Smith. First of all, I guess thanks for joining me. Obviously, I think with your background, I think this is going to be really interesting, and there's going to be a lot of insight that's unique. So I guess start off, give some of that background, what your background is relates to gambling, but also some of the sports end of things as well.
Yeah, so my career was in sports media, in sports broadcasting. I worked for a very big radio network here in the UK called talkSPORT. It's a commercial organisation. Has a big listener base, 3 million plus listeners, and I worked there for 12 years of my career. And I was in a management position for most of that, where I was a program manager and I was in charge of live outside broadcasts. So that meant traveling the world watching sport for a living, basically. Dream job, right? So I went to a lot of horse racing, football, golf, rugby union, cricket, all sorts of sport, boxing in Las Vegas. Lots of stuff over the 12 years. My role was to basically organise everything. So essentially, I was a production manager for most of my career, where I would put a production together. So that's logistics and operations based. But I was a producer as well in my early time. I was also a technical operator when I first started. So I used to drive the mixing desk and stuff like that. Moved into producing programs, and then went on into more of a management role and looking after large teams, traveling to major sports events. After that, I went and worked in Singapore for a year. We set up a sports radio station over there, which was similar to what we did at talkSPORT. And then I went to work for a company called HBS, which are the broadcast arm of FIFA. And I worked for them for a short period at the FIFA World Cup in Brazil in 2014. Again, in a management position, and my job was to kind of liaise with the broadcasters, between the broadcasters and the host broadcaster, for anything they wanted to do. So yeah, heavily involved in sport for most of my life.
Yeah. And so at what point, obviously you're on here to discuss, and now at this point, I think you said you have 4.5 years of sobriety from gambling.
5.5.
5.5?
Yeah, 5.5.
Yeah, 5.5. Awesome. I had my number wrong. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
Now, let's dive into that. What were some of your early memories of gambling? Was it sports related? Was it somewhere else?
I can wind right back to school, to be honest with you, Jamie. We play a game here in the UK, and there's many different names for it, but the name that we called it was tipsy, and that was you'd throw a coin up against the wall. Somebody else would throw a coin up against the wall, and the closest coin to the wall would win the money. And I used to play that at school, and I now remember how addicted to that I was. I couldn't wait to finish school to play that game with 3 or 4 people. Sometimes I wouldn't have much money to play, but what I started doing was I would steal money from my mum's purse, or if she had some money lying around the house or something, I'd take some extra coins, hoping that she wouldn't notice, just to play this game. So that was my earliest memory of gambling.
What age was that?
That was like 14, 15, while I was at school.
Wow. And I'm fascinated by that for a couple of reasons. One, obviously it's a very young age, but it's very common. I mean, I was a golfer and kind of the similar age started to do some betting. But then the other, I don't know if you've watched The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary.
A lot of people have told me about it.
So they were playing the game that you described, and I had no clue. Wow. He's there with a security guard, right, and they have coins out, and they're throwing them, and they're betting dollars or whatever it was. And I had no clue what it was like. And so when you said that and you started describing it, I'm like, that's the game Jordan was playing in the documentary. So it's
Wow.
interesting little tidbit there.
That's amazing, because so many people have been saying to me recently, you must watch that documentary. So I know to expect that part in it now. So yeah, and then later on I went to university, and I remember, at university I used to play a lot of fruit machines, slot machines, and again, we get a student grant here, so you get given a certain amount of money to get you through each term. And I'd get to 2 or 3 weeks of the term left and have no money, and all my peers around me would still have money to spend and go out and do this, that, and the other, and I didn't. And I remember I was gambling a lot on these fruit machines in the bars and the pubs while I was at university. And then gambling left me for a while. Once I left university, I walked straight into my job. So I graduated from university in July in 2001. And then I got a job at talkSPORT in September 2001. So a really short period of time. So moved to London, started the job there. And I must say, for 8 or 9 years, from 2001 up until 2010, I did not gamble. I had no thoughts on gambling. It wasn't in my brain at all. So those things that I was doing at school and the stuff at university just wasn't with me anymore. I wasn't doing that stuff. And then in 2010, I went to work at the Football World Cup in South Africa. And we stayed in Johannesburg in a suburb called Sandton, which is very close to a casino called the Monte Casino. And I got a couple of colleagues together and we went down to the casino. And, I hadn't been gambling for a long time. So I just thought, yeah, what, I'll play a few rounds of cards on the blackjack table with the guys. This is at about 8, 9 o'clock in the evening. The next thing I know, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. So I've been in there for 10, 11 hours, something like that, and spent a whole ton of money, completely knackered, tired out, when bearing in mind I've got a 5-week football tournament to look after and 20 odd staff with me that I've got to, look after. And it just came completely out of the blue again. Now, I didn't realise at that point that it was going to be utter carnage for the next 4 years. But that was the opening of the door. And I couldn't wait to get back in that casino. But because my workload was so heavy, I started gambling online while I was out there. So the addiction had got me straight away. I was straight in there, and bearing in mind, I had a lot more disposable income than I had when I was at university and when I was at school.
Well, so it's fascinating because you do have this big gap, right? Where you just any ideas on what it was that was it just that work was filling that time and void that maybe you were feeling, or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was in a relationship for a long period, for about 4 or 5 years of that gap. And yes, I was really busy at work. I was focused on my career. I was quite successful with what I was doing. I'd moved from a really junior position up into, looking after large teams going overseas, which is a really responsible position to be in. So I wonder if it was the fact that I was just really busy with that stuff and just didn't have any thoughts on gambling during that period. It was really, really strange. But when it hit me, it really hit me like a train, and I actually remember that night now being in that casino, to this day.
Yeah. Was there anything about that one experience? Was there a win, or was it just you think that gap of space? Like, were there wins in college? Or was it just, you think it's maybe just like all of a sudden you kind of got that rush back and just for whatever reason?
You know what part of it was as well? I was working with a lot of ex-footballers, ex-soccer players, I should say, in America. And one of the guys, and I won't mention his name, but he used to play for England. Played football for England, and we played at the casino table together. And it was almost like the buzz up. Yeah, these are my celebrity friends. We're playing at the casino. This is like, almost like a dream world of the compulsive gambler. I was in that kind of mode. And yeah, just completely came out of nowhere. But I didn't win any money that night. And maybe over the period of the 5 weeks while I was out there. Now, I wasn't heavily gambling online for that 5 weeks. I did my job really quite successfully. It was this kind of, went to the casino in the first few days there, gambled online for a few days, and then it kind of went away for a month or so. And, I didn't gamble again after that. It was actually later on, I think probably a few months later then, that when gambling came back. So I was almost like, at that time, I thought I was like a binge gambler. I'd do it for a few days, have a few months off, and then go back to it again.
Well, then you said, so eventually it turns online, right? And that's where you said down the road, all of a sudden you start to look out for online gambling. Can you talk us through a little bit of that?
Yeah, that's right. Because online gambling was easy, because I was working away a lot and traveling around the world. I could gamble anywhere by being on my computer. So the next memory really of kind of heavily gambling was in 2011, when I was in New Zealand at the Rugby World Cup. And we had a smaller team. I think there was about 12 or 13 of us went out there, but it was a long tournament. I think I was out there for about 7 weeks. And I remember a lot more gambling heavily online. So we rented an apartment out there. And because of the time difference with the UK, we had quite a lot of downtime. And I remember doing quite a bit of online gambling, and looking at it now, particularly one of my colleagues, I think he kind of sussed out, he knew what I was doing. Because what happened was, we went to a restaurant one evening, and we were sat in the restaurant, and he said to me about gambling. He didn't ask me whether I was gambling, but he started talking about gambling. Now, at that point, I was in so much like kind of denial, I had really no idea what he was talking about. So just had a brief conversation with him about it and left it there. 6 months ago, I found out he's actually in recovery for gambling, and he has been for 10 years. So he was trying to give me a message at that time, but I didn't see the message.
Yeah.
And I tell you what happened over there, Jamie. Like, I really enjoyed being in New Zealand. It was fantastic watching rugby and stuff. But I had a trip planned afterwards, and I was going to Samoa in the South Pacific for a couple of weeks holiday after the tournament. And I basically had borrowed money off friends, and, because I'd been online gambling, so I got them to wire me some money and this, that, and the other. And I got to a point where I nearly couldn't go on that holiday. I did not have enough money left. So I went to a casino with the last bit of money I had one night and won, and managed to walk out of the casino with the winnings and go on the holiday that I'd planned. But to risk that holiday, to gamble all that way through that tournament for 7 weeks on and off, borrowing money off people, asking them for money, when, by the way, I was in a reasonably paid job. So, always eyebrows were going to be raised a little bit when you're asking people for money if you're in a decent paid job. Yeah, so I got to a point, where I'd risked going on holiday for that. And that gave me a little bit of a scare. And it didn't stop there. I went on holiday and gambled from an internet cafe while I was on holiday. I was really, in the grips of it then. I just couldn't stop.
Yeah. Well, that's so, looking back, it seems like it happened a lot of times. You're on these work vacations, right? Or kind of like triggers for whatever reason. Do you think it was kind of the loneliness or the pressure, or does that kind of resonate, or was it just kind of the opportunity?
No, that does resonate. I was really lonely, actually. When I look back at it now, my connection that I had with other human beings, it wasn't there. I was almost like emotionally void. I had I couldn't really seem to form relationships properly with people. Yeah, I'd go out for a few beers and I'd have dinner, but I could never talk to people, if that makes sense. Like, everything I was always talking about was work. I didn't really have anything else going on in my life,
Yeah.
And I think that, that loneliness was so true, to the point of I would be in a stadium with 70, 80,000 people around me and still feel really lonely, feel completely different to everybody else. And gambling almost kind of like took me away from that. It was like it took me out of that loneliness. But what it also did was took me into a world of pain and destruction, which I'm sure we'll get onto at some point as well. But it took me into, yeah, some really kind of dark places. I was never suicidal from gambling, I must admit. And I have heard a lot of stories where it has made people suicidal, but it didn't take me that far. But I can say I felt very anxious and very depressed at times.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely use gambling as kind of a numbing agent in a lot of ways. And I mean, so when you say like you were around a lot of people, but you really weren't kind of interacting, that definitely was me. And I bring that up, and I think this is a really important thing to discuss right now, especially, I mean, coming out of COVID-19. I mean, we have a lot of lockdowns. You have a lot of people that for the first time in a long time, whatever they do and they enjoy or as their form of escape has been removed. And I think a lot of people are even just, I mean, embrace and working from home and all those types of things. So it's really kind of a dangerous time in some ways if we're not aware of the fact that, hey, we have these needs, these emotional needs, these connection needs, and when those aren't met, turning to things like gambling or alcohol or any vice is really something that we need to be mindful of to understand that risk. And it sounds like that's kind of where it was for you, is that loneliness kind of you turned to gambling as an outlet for that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel really grateful, Jamie, that I'm actually in recovery now, particularly at this, time during the pandemic and the lockdown, because what I would be like if I was in active addiction at the moment during this lockdown, I don't think, I mean, that could have tipped me over the edge. This kind of situation could have, took me to suicide. I mean, a really good friend of mine actually said to me while I was, but he actually said it after I'd stopped gambling. He said to me, "I thought you might end up killing yourself." Now, I could never see that, but he could see it from the outside. And, loneliness and that kind of lack of connection with other people is absolutely a trigger. I mean, I'm so grateful for the people that I've got in my life today, and, that you can't shut me up these days. I love talking to people. I really like having unity with friends and connections and really building on relationships, which were things that I didn't know how to do back then. I didn't know how to do it. It's almost like I had to be shown the way, if that makes sense.
No, it completely does. I mean, it's a skill, right? And a lot of times, I mean, we're taught a lot of things in school and growing up, but sometimes we miss these basic ones. So no, that resonates with me quite a bit.
So yeah. So I just feel really grateful right now for being in recovery during this situation, because yes, it would be really difficult. And I know there's been a lot of talk on the news over here in the UK about problem gambling right now. So clearly there's quite some focus on it, because I think that people would be turning to it during this time because of the financial pressures of the lockdown and the strains on the economy, people not working. People might see gambling as a quick way out financially, or just a way to pass time. And then before you know it, you're down a black hole.
Yeah. You and I both know that black hole well. So I guess let's go there. Let's continue on with what did gambling do? So obviously now at this point, it's kind of sporadic. Obviously it's having some impacts, but continue on with where gambling took you.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's some strange stories which I haven't really talked about before, but we've got a racing festival in the UK called Cheltenham Festival, big horse racing event over 4 days. And I used to go there every year. That was one of my jobs that I had to do. Now, for a compulsive gambler to go to Cheltenham for 4 days, he's like, wow, that's a big deal. The strange thing was, Jamie, in the time that I was gambling when I went there, I never gambled at the racetrack. I wanted to be away from people and gamble. So I would finish my job. My job was in the mornings, mainly before the racing started. And then I would go to a bookmaker's about 30 minutes drive away and spend the afternoon there. because for me, I couldn't just gamble on the Cheltenham Festival on one race at a time every half an hour. I had to be on multiple races. There was other racing going on in other parts of the UK as well. I had to be on the machine at the same time, playing blackjack or whatever. I couldn't just have one bet on. I had to be across absolutely everything. That was the madness. It wasn't just like, I'll have a small bet on a horse at Cheltenham. It was like I was loaded up, ready to go, and that was how it was going to be for me. So, to most people, they would find that absolutely crazy that you're working at Cheltenham, but not actually staying there and watching the horse racing, which is why most people go, So, it was really strange. And then, in 2012, so between 2011 and 2012, when I got back from New Zealand, I had a new boss at work who I'd been working with for a couple of years. We didn't really get on. I found it very difficult. I had a good relationship with our chief executive, who I've spoken about in another podcast, and I've talked about in a book recently, who was fantastic, did so much for me, and I owe a lot to him, really. But I was still gambling when I got back to the office in London. And what I'd do is, because I wanted to avoid any conflict with my boss, I'd just go out to the bookmakers. Now, working in the media industry, it's quite normal to go out at lunchtime and have an alcoholic drink, and have a couple of drinks at lunchtime was quite normal behaviour in the media industry here. So I didn't want to do that and be with everybody. So instead, I'd take myself off to the bookmakers, and I'd spend hours in there in the afternoon. I'd make up something like I'd have meetings to go to, or I didn't feel very well and I was going to go home, or I'd just turn my phone off for a couple of hours and just hope that nobody would notice I wasn't there, because I wasn't there all the time anyway, And for a long period, I kind of got away with it. I don't think anybody had really realised, that it was so extreme at that point. But for me, it was, because I was borrowing money off payday loan companies, off banks. I was maxing out my credit cards. I wasn't paying my rent. My housemate was on my case, about paying rent. I wasn't doing that. I was living month to month. How am I going to eat? How am I going to do stuff? I was going to casinos most nights in the centre of London. And then losing money and then borrowing more money again, and not getting home till 4 or 5 in the morning. And if I did have a win, and this is a classic story of one night I had a win and I took the money, which was an absolute rarity for me, because I never used to walk out with money at all, with winnings. And I got into the dream world. I'm going to get a nice flat, and I'm going to rent a nice flat in Canary Wharf in London, which is a financial district, in one of the real modern high-rises there, like penthouse flat. That's going to be for me. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to travel the world, first class. I'm going to buy a ticket and have a couple of months off work. Not even spoken to work about having any time off, just planned it all in my head. By the way, I was doing that already for a living, traveling the world, watching sport for a living. But, that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to go off on my own time. So I got this money, and my plan was to go and buy this ticket and go around the world for a couple of months. I could not get past the bookmakers the next morning. I walked into the bookmakers, the betting office, and I did all that money, which was a considerable amount of money. And I don't talk about numbers, but it was enough to do those things. And 2 hours later, I walked out and I had nothing left. And that situation repeated itself quite a few times during my gambling days, and the utter devastation that I felt afterwards, and that kind of emptiness and anger and hatred of myself, it just kept coming back and it kept coming back. But it was like a vicious cycle, and maybe you can identify with that kind of the losing, then trying to get more money to gamble again and try and win it back, and just in that cycle and never being able to get out of it.
Yeah, no, completely. And that's especially, like you say, I mean, it's not like you don't have a job. You have a well-paying job. You're visually on the front end for everybody successful, right? Nobody knows the devastation that's going on. And that's why I always say it's almost like two paths going completely different directions, where you have this vision everybody sees and believes, but internally you have this this path that you're financially ruining yourself, and you know that that other one isn't true. And so then you fight even harder to get back on that track, and you're trying to get there faster, hoping that people will never have to find out. I mean, that was always my experience. I don't know if that resonates, but, and so you just keep going back to that same cycle, even though it doesn't work, because you think, okay, that one big win will get me closer.
Yeah, that's all I ever used to think, was that one big win is going to fix this. I'm going to pay off my debts. I'm going to pay off these people. I'm going to have a good life. As I say, I had a good life already, but that started to blow up in my face. And this is where we get on to the next part of the story, where we wind forward to 2012. And in 2012, I'd been going through this cycle then, from 2011 through to 2012, having money, gambling it, having no money, struggling to feed myself, struggling to pay my rent, all these things. And I had a meeting with my boss and somebody from our human resources department, and we were talking about like unpaid parking tickets, things like this for the company car. And it came out in conversation, Matt, if you've got a problem with anything, you can talk to us. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm a problem? So I just kind of skirted over it, agreed to pay the fines or whatever. We sorted it all out, and that was it, went away. But because I was in the grip of gambling, I'd borrowed money, I'd created scenarios and manipulated people for money, and I'd got myself into a couple of very difficult situations. And bearing in mind that I was in a position of responsibility, the company that I worked for were very well known. I went out to the Euros, the football in 2012 in Poland and Ukraine. The job previously, I was able to do really well, really professionally. I was highly respected, and I was meticulous with detail. But because I'd been gambling heavily, I had let a lot of things slip before this tournament. And if you're taking 20 staff overseas and you're moving them around 2 countries for 4 weeks, and you haven't got travel booked for somebody, or you haven't got hotels booked for somebody, there's going to be a problem somewhere. And it all really started to get on top of me. And what happened was, somebody that I had owed money to had got hold of one of the newspapers or somebody in the UK who run like a kind of a media diary, and I got into a position where I walked up to the opening game in Warsaw, in Poland, which was the opening ceremony of Euro 2012. And my job was to be there and kind of lead the team. And I walked up to the gates and looked at the stadium and just thought to myself, I cannot do this. I cannot go and do my job. Didn't tell anybody, switched off my phone, turned around, walked to a hotel, which I knew, and drank and drank and drank. And eventually a driver came to pick me up, took me back over the border to Ukraine, and I met a couple of my colleagues who were all clearly very concerned about me at that point, because I hadn't checked in with any of them. There was a lot of stuff flying around about me, what I'd done, manipulated money out of people, this, that, and the other. It was all closing in. And what happened was I said to my colleagues, I want to go home. And that's what I did. I went home. I left the tournament after probably a few days, and a colleague of mine said, you're going to come and stay with me out in the countryside, and we're going to take care of you, and we're going to work through this together. And this is how mad I was, not just about the gambling, Jamie, but when they said to me, we've booked you a flight home, I said, no, I don't want that flight home. I want to stay and watch the England game first. So bearing in mind, I've blown everything up. There's people running around after me. Everything's going mad. Hotels aren't booked. Things haven't happened. And I'm still trying to run the show. I don't want to go home now. I want to stay for the England game first. I was told in no uncertain terms, you're getting on that plane. And that's what I did. And I got back to the UK, and that is probably then when the journey of recovery started. What happened was I went and stayed with a friend who was an ex-cricketer, played cricket for England, a man called Ronnie Irani, who I owe so much to him and his family. They let me stay with him. I had a meeting with our chief executive, and he said, look, what we're going to do is we're going to send you to counselling. You have time off to go and do this, and you'll go counselling. And, you know, the discussion was then I had to go to Gamblers Anonymous meetings. I couldn't drink for a month or so, and I couldn't gamble, and I couldn't do anything, you know. So I just had to kind of live a normal person's life for a month, which I was not capable of. So I was going to counselling at this beautiful country house in the middle of the countryside, about half an hour outside of London, and sitting with a counsellor who's asking me questions that I don't have the answers to, and was not interested in engaging in whatsoever, because all I wanted to do was gamble. I was blaming stuff on my boss, I was blaming stuff on my family, all this kind of thing. I really wasn't engaging in the process. And this went on for, you know, a couple of months, and then eventually I got caught out gambling by somebody in the house that I was staying with. The niece of my friend caught me gambling. She obviously told him, which was the right thing to do, of course, to tell him, and I had to leave the house. And I went and stayed with another friend for a while, but he didn't know I had a problem with gambling, so it just carried on online, in bookies, doing whatever. I was still getting paid full pay while I was off. I was checking in now and again. I had a meeting with my old boss, who kind of took on an investigation into what had gone on with me and all this kind of stuff, and just dragged it out and out. This was in June, and eventually I left the company in November. You know, so I didn't work for those 5 or 6 months. I just gambled it away, lied to my family about what was going on, saying I had mental health issues, I needed time out, this, that, and the other. Just kind of knocked on people's doors from people I knew 10 years, 15 years ago, saying, yeah, I've got time off work, just traveling, thought I'd come and see you, see how you're doing. Really, I was just looking for a place to stay. I was homeless at that point, but again, in denial that I was homeless, because I thought, because I had some money in the bank, you know, and I was still getting paid, I wasn't homeless, you know. Really strange scenario in a way. And eventually I had to leave my job, you know, and I left my job. I met up with the chief executive for the last time. We had a very frank conversation. He was very frank with me. They wanted me to stay, but I couldn't stay because I was still gambling. And that was the start of recovery, in the sense that I was going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings for that short period, but then stopped going, carried on gambling, and then another 2 years of carnage.
Yeah. And well, obviously you had such a big support system, right? With work and friends, and it was kind of cool. Yeah. So that's the nice thing. But I think obviously it shows that until we're kind of ready, or we get to the point where it's on us to make the decision. And I'm sure a lot of it is kind of, and it sounds like even you get to the gates of the sporting event and it's like, I can't do this, right? Like that weight, and like eventually all that stuff, it sounds like, had built up over time. And it was too much to handle. You knew it was too much to handle in your work. And then you, even after work, like it was kind of that snowball effect had finally caught up to where it was just, you look left, you look right, and you can't figure out a way to go forward. Is that
completely? I mean, one of my colleagues, when I left and I met the 2 colleagues in Ukraine, one of my colleagues had suffered with mental health issues himself. And when I told him I've had enough and I want to go home, and was crying, he just gave me a big hug. He knew it had all come crashing down. And, but he still had some sympathy there for me because he'd been through some dark places himself. So, yeah, so I left. And then what happened was I was out of work for a while. So I went to live with my mum. So bearing in mind, I've not lived with my mum at this point for 15 years, making some story up to her that, oh yeah, I've still got my job, but I'm not going back for a while and I need some time out and this, that, and the other. I can't even remember now, Jamie, exactly how I sold it to her, but I sold it to her.
Yeah.
She was giving me handouts of money every day. I was going down to the bookmakers. I was losing the money. I was going back for more money. And after about 3 or 4 months, I got offered a job in Singapore. But the relationship between my mum and I at that point had completely broken down, because she was giving me money all the time. She didn't know what I was doing with it. She probably had an idea I was gambling, but couldn't pin it on me or whatever. And I had put her through the mill. And I remember her one day just sitting on the end of a bed crying. You know, she's like a 70-year-old woman, you know, who'd had enough. So I went to Singapore, got a job there, told her I was going, you know, and the problem was, Jamie, that I wasn't in recovery at all. You know, I was still gambling, and I thought in my mind, this is a fresh start for me. I'm going to another country. I'm going to another well-paid job. This is going to be great. They don't know my past. Brilliant. Within 2 days of getting to Singapore, I'm gambling again in the Marina Bay Sands Hotel, and can't stop myself. I don't know anybody there. I burnt out my network back home, so I can't borrow any money. So what am I going to do? You know, I'm living with no money. I'm in a flat that I'm renting over there. Again, the same cycle starts to happen. I start to not pay my rent. They want to know why I'm not paying my rent. I start making up lies. All the things happen. I start manipulating people over there for money. Poor me, poor me. I'm British. I'm stranded over here. Blah blah blah. You know, and the same cycle strikes me again. And then I got caught. Then I had to leave Singapore. I was very, very lucky to get out of Singapore because I'd overstayed my visa, because I went into hiding over there. I nearly couldn't get out. Singapore's a really strict country, you know, so if you disobey those laws, luckily, a very kind man who I worked with there paid the fine for me to get out. I didn't have the money to pay the fine. It was about $500, I think, something like that. He paid the fine. It could have been a lot worse than a fine. It could have been imprisonment. Some of the things I'd done there could have led to imprisonment, because I was so addicted to gambling. And I was there for about 9 or 10 months, I think. And I didn't speak to my mum at all in that time. I'd gone off the radar because I was so ashamed, so guilty. And I just had the vision of her crying when I left, and, you know, didn't know what was going on, that I just didn't want to put her through any more pain. I just couldn't do it, Jamie. I could not put her through any more pain. So, yeah, came back to the UK, landed, and phoned a friend, stayed with a friend who I hadn't seen for 10 years, carried on gambling, carried on doing that stuff, got another job, went to Brazil for the World Cup, did a brilliant job. The guy who I worked for there absolutely loved me. If I wasn't gambling, I could have had a job with them for life, probably. They wrote me such a fantastic review and all this stuff, you know, really, they were so pleased with the job that I did. But again, I was gambling over there. I entered into a relationship with a girl in Brazil. So after my job there, I remember being in a hotel and I was gambling in the lobby of the hotel on the internet. She was asking me what I was doing. I was trying to hide stuff from her. I was burning through money like there was no tomorrow, paying for hotels for us to stay in, meals out, plus gambling, you know, and just utter carnage. Got stranded in Brazil because I missed my flight home, didn't have the money to come back. Loads and loads of stuff. You know, I could go on forever about it all, but I want to really get onto the recovery.
Yeah.
The pain's there. Do you know what I mean? The pain was there. There was a lot of pain. There was a lot of madness. There was a lot of denial. There was a lot of worry. I was worried. People were worried about me. And I came back to the UK in July 2014. And I went and stayed with a friend this time who I hadn't spoken to for about 20 years. And it was crazy. It was crazy staying there. There was a lot of drug taking. There was a lot of alcohol. It was just like, it was messed up. I was sleeping on the floor on like a camp bed. So I'd gone from living in London in a nice flat to this camp bed. I wasn't showering. I wasn't like, I couldn't even get in the shower anymore. Just wanted to go to the bookmakers, just wanted to get out of there. And what happened was something I forgot to mention, that back in 2012, when I left talkSPORT, a man who Ronnie knew, who runs a treatment centre in Bournemouth, where I am now, called the Providence Project, Paul Spanger, came to see me in London. He came up from Bournemouth just to see me for the day and talk to me about addiction and gambling. And what happened was he planted a seed in my mind. And then what happened in 2014 when I got back, one morning I woke up and I had an extended, what I called an extended window of clarity, Jamie, where I thought, I do not want to live like this anymore. I have had enough. And I phoned Paul up, who I'd met in London, and I said, I know you run the treatment centre. I really want to come. And he said, Matt, come. You come. We'll have you. Free of charge. No, he didn't charge me, like charity. He gave me a charitable place. I contacted one of my friends who had borrowed money off left, right and centre, one of my closest friends, John, and he paid for the train ticket from Birmingham to come down to Bournemouth. He had to check with the treatment centre first I was coming, because I told him so many lies in the past. He had to ring them up and check. So it took him hours to get back to me. And I was like, and he'll listen to this when I've done it as well. And, he did that for me. And that was it. That was the start of the journey. I went into treatment.
I mean, I think it highlights a lot of things, which I really like, which is, one, we often think of like recovery as like, okay, so one day the switch flips and all of a sudden things just miraculously get better and everything changes. That was not my experience. I tried to quit many times. One point I stopped for 9 months. And we have these different interventions, and we're always looking for these different things. And sometimes, and that's why I always tell people, just keep going, because sometimes you just need something to click, right? And the other thing I love, which is the planting of the seed. And that's along the way, that seed was planted. And then when you're ready, there it was. And you kind of saw that door finally open for you. So I guess let's get into the good stuff. Let's talk about what's the last 5.5 years been like. What were some of the things that you've learned? How different is life now?
Fantastic. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. First of all, I should talk about the relationship with my mother, because I spoke about that in the story and how much I'd hurt her. The relationship now between my mum and I is the best it's ever been. We have a fantastically close relationship. I've been able to be there for her during this pandemic. I've been able to put in daily phone calls to her, and we have a really close relationship. I see her 4 or 5 times a year. I go up and visit. We speak regularly. I love her very much. She loves me very much. She understands, and she doesn't hold it against me. One thing I've really realized about her is the strength of her, the strength that she has, and how she's recovered from my addiction as well. Because it's not just us who recover, is it? It's the people around us, That's one thing, our relationship, my relationship with my friends. So, I hope my friend John doesn't mind me saying this, because he will listen, I'm sure he will. But John supported me all the way through my journey of recovery. Helped me get down to Bournemouth. He lent me money when I needed it, and when I was gambling as well and things like that. He helped me get back on my feet in my flat. He gave me some money to do my flat up a little bit. He's just been an absolute rock to me, like a brother at times. And I remember I got a message off him about 6 months ago when I'd last seen him, and he sent me a message to say, him and his wife basically saying, we are so lucky to have you in our lives. And I just thought, wow, 5.5 years on from the madness that I put him through and all that, for somebody to say something like that to me, was just an absolute blessing. Friendships, I got so many friends, people in recovery for gambling, people in recovery for alcohol, people not in recovery, all different walks of life. I'm working again. I'm not working in media at the moment. However, that was my choice for quite a long time. I did have an interview recently, but I turned the job down at a big football club. a big soccer club in the UK, but I didn't want it because I didn't want to move back to London. So I can make choices now using my gut feeling rather than just kind of going off into a dreamland again. So I'm working in a completely different job at the moment. I earn half the money that I used to earn, but I'm happy. I've got purpose. I had an interview just before the pandemic, working in media again, project manager job. They wanted to see me again. They wanted to talk terms, and then the pandemic comes along and everything's stopped for now. So hopefully that will come back. I live in a nice flat. I live right by the sea. I pay my rent on time. I've got money in the bank to pay my bills, to go on holiday. I've got self-esteem. I'm confident. I help other compulsive gamblers, newcomers. I do a lot of service in Gamblers Anonymous. Gamblers Anonymous isn't for everybody, by the way. I know that. I understand that. I know there's lots of other support networks as well, but Gamblers Anonymous works for me. That's what I do. It's one of my things that I do, to keep sane and to keep off a bet. And I found things that I enjoy again, just going out for a walk. I live right by the sea. I live near to a forest, so I go for long walks. I go dating. I'm doing lots of different things. And, that life has just improved immeasurably. And what I say to people all the time is the one big thing for me, Jamie, is now I wake up every morning without anxiety, without stress. I wake up with peace of mind, knowing that I've not hurt anybody and I've not hurt myself today. And that is the biggest gift that not gambling's given me.
Well, and it's written all over your face and in your emotion. I mean, like, you're free. Like, there's not the weight, and there was the huge weight when I was gambling. Like, and you're trying to go through all that. And it's just the weight just keeps pushing you out, pushing you down. You lose your confidence. You lose all those things: the friends, the family, the time, the money. Like, you lose it all. And when you stop, all of a sudden, you don't have those things. And it's a freeing experience. And obviously, you're very public about talking and helping other people, which is a huge part. And that's, for me, I've found that to be even more freeing. It's like, all right, here's my worst day in life. Okay. And I made it through and things are good. Like, I don't have that stress in my life anymore. And I found a happiness. And yeah, you talk about walking, and I'm jealous about the walks by the sea. I'll live with my walks through the forest and around here in my nice little neighborhood, but it's such a simple thing, right? I mean, every morning I go out and I go for anywhere from a 10 to 20-minute walk. And I used to always have headphones to listen to stuff. Now I don't even do that very much. I just kind of listen, and you hear the birds and you hear like these simple things that we miss, and because we're chasing something shiny, and the stuff is right there in front of us. So
I love that, because you're so right. The birds tweeting, for example, and when I have my window open here and I can hear the birds, it makes me feel good, because that's something that I wouldn't notice before. And those 10, 15, 20-minute walks, out in the countryside or out in the forest, I love that. I notice things that I've never noticed before. And that's, really important for me as well. I'm not going to say that recovery is all, rainbows and pots of gold and it's all fantastic. It's lots of ups and downs, but it's more ups and downs than downs, I find. And the great thing for me is now that when I'm down, I have the ability to pick up the phone and speak to somebody in my support network and tell them exactly how I'm feeling and what's on my mind. And that is something that I never had before. And what you said about going publicly and speaking about this stuff, it's really important for me as well, because, when I did the part in the book that I sent you, the 20 years of talkSPORT behind the scenes, they asked me to do this part in the book and relive the gambling stories, basically, and why I left. And honestly, I did not want to do it at first. But the guy who wrote the book, Ian, he's a great guy. We used to sit opposite next to each other in the office. We had a chat on the phone. He was so sympathetic and understanding and, literally kind of guided me through it, how it was going to be. And I felt so comfortable talking that story to him. And with my friend John as well supporting me through doing that, I was managed to tell my story. And the reason I wanted to tell that story, Jamie, was simply to say that the disease of gambling addiction can happen to anybody. Here's my story. Here's the dream job that I had. Here's the dream life I had. And it still happened to me. And if you read this story and you are struggling, I want you to know that recovery is possible. You know, you can, and you will get better if you give it a go. So, you know, I think it's really important to tell my story. And the first time I told it, obviously it sent a lot of chills down my spine, you know. And what I said to a lot of people was that I've had to make amends in this process, but making amends and putting things right doesn't absolve me from those things that I did. What it means is I accept responsibility for those things that I did. I'm not asking to say those things never happened. They happened. I accept responsibility for them. I want to try and make it right, and then we move on. And I think that's what any of us can hope for, is to move on, you know, because we can't be prisoners in our own mind and stuck in our past.
Yeah, absolutely. So for somebody that's listening to this and they've experienced some of those struggles that your story connects with, and obviously you mentioned GA, you've mentioned some walks, any other things that stand out as things that you would suggest for people? And you mentioned reaching out to people, which obviously having a support network is
Well, your
huge.
podcast for a start is a good start, isn't it?
I'd like to think so. I'm
I
a
think
little
it's a
partial,
fantastic,
but
I think it's a fantastic start. Yeah, you know, listen to people's stories, because if you can identify with people's stories, you know you're not alone. That was the biggest thing for me. I thought I'm the only person. Connect with other people. Now, I know I've said, you know, Gamblers Anonymous is not for everybody, but what Gamblers Anonymous has given to me is friendships, you know, and unity and support and structure. Yeah, all right, we meet in a church hall, you know, once a week, you know, but you know what? We go out regularly, we play golf together, we go out for dinner together, we've got support, we've got unity, you know. At the moment, this pandemic, what's been brilliant for us is we've got loads of Zoom meetings. So we've now got a twin meeting in San Francisco, which has got 150, 200 years of recovery in there. There's guys in there with 50 plus years of gambling recovery. So listening to their stories, they're listening to our stories, having that support network. Structure is really important. Exercise is really important. Getting into a routine, being honest with people. If you don't feel too good, tell them you don't feel too good. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging how we feel. You know, some people meditate. It's not for me, meditation, but I might have a quiet period throughout the day where I'll read a book for 10, 15 minutes. I listen to music, find hobbies, find things that you enjoy doing. I think there's loads and loads of stuff you can do. And yes, it all sounds quite daunting at first, like having to kind of flip your life around. But I found that after I'd got through the first 90 days, things got a lot easier for me. But the number one thing that has worked for me is connecting with other people, connecting with people who have the same problem as me. And another thing that I find really useful is when I get stuck in my own head and I'm a prisoner in my own mind, I reach out to somebody and I ask them, is there something I can do for them? By doing something for them or asking them how they are, immediately gets me out of my own head. Because 9 times out of 10, we don't know what's going on in other people's lives. And when we know, it almost makes our lives feel a bit better, you know, in a bizarre kind of way. I've got friends who've got families who've really been struggling during this pandemic with their children and stuff like this. So they're like ringing me, telling me their problems have been with the kids and stuff. And I'm ringing them, telling them my problems have been on my own. And that really helps us, you know. So yeah, I think doing voluntary work, you know, I've tried to do a bit of voluntary work during the pandemic for the National Health Service, and just getting out there, helping others, listening to newcomers who are struggling. I'm on a couple of Facebook groups as well where I hear people's stories, and I always try to reach out to people and, you know, and just say, like, you know, it is possible. You can get better, but you've got to want it, haven't you, Jamie? You've got to want to do it.
Yeah. You do. And sometimes it helps to have some people around you that help push you into wanting to do it as well. But at the end of the day, like, it does come down to us. We have to make the decision, and it's a daily decision. I mean, 10 years in now, nearly 10 years, and it's a daily decision. I mean, I have that decision. The beauty is I have that decision out there and I can make a choice. There was a
Yes.
time where it wasn't even an option. It was just like, okay, the habit, all right, this thought comes in and I'm gone. I mean, there was no, but now I'm able to put space in between those thoughts and actions, which allow me to then make what I consider to be better decisions for my life. And looking around my life, I'm like you, everything feels so good. And with the pandemic, I feel very lucky.
I'm loving all your pictures behind you, by the way.
Thanks. So yes, this is my home office. I work from home normally, so this pandemic in that way has always been easy. And so I have my kids' artwork up there. That's some of those we need to change it up and get some new ones. But I do. I enjoy it. It's
And
a nice thing to be surrounded by family and by. I mean, none of these things would exist. I mean, if I would have continued gambling, none of these things. I wouldn't be in this house. I wouldn't have the wife I have, the kids I have, the job I have, anything that I have. And that's why when people ask me like, oh, well, wouldn't you want to play poker again? And that was my game of choice. I look at them and say, was it fun at times? Yes. But do I want to trade in everything I have in my life for one game, one thing? And the answer is no, of course not. Like, and now I'm to the point where, I mean, if sitting at a poker table for 7 or 8 hours sounds like hell, especially now they're putting up these ones with plexiglass. Like, I mean, and I would have been that person. I would have been at the person saying, no, it's fine. I'll take my chances with coronavirus to sit at a poker table. But now I look at that and that's not even like, why would I want to do that? I'm surrounded by, I have everything I ever want. And I'm not chasing the things that I felt like I was insecure and I didn't have. So
and
it's
that's
a
right.
journey, and like you say, it's ups and it's downs. It's all those things, and I think that's just being human. I don't think anybody gets out of here without those problems.
I
So
think you're right. And one of the big things I've noticed as well, and my friends talk to me quite a lot about, is that the good things that seem to happen in our lives in recovery is they come out of nowhere. I mean, completely come out of nowhere. You know, not expecting it to happen. And I do believe, you know, by putting in positive action and doing things and being of service to other people and all that kind of stuff, something's going to come back to us in the end, you know, and that's for me a big deal. Like the more I put into this kind of stuff and working on myself and recovery and all that, the more I get out of it and the more
yeah,
opportunities come my way and the happier I am. And I'm just so pleased that during this lockdown that I'm in recovery, because I have the ability now to sit with myself, Jamie, to
yep.
sit with myself rather than thinking I've got to get on my, like, we would not be talking for an hour, believe me. I'd be like flicking
No,
my screen up and down.
and obviously this is about gambling, but I've touched on this a lot recently on Twitter and other places, which is everybody has their vices. I mean, I see a lot of people, they go to the gym or they go shopping or they go to work,
Yes,
and those
yes,
are like, those are just as harmful because of the ways they're using those products or those outlets. They're going with intent of trying to escape something that isn't right. And eventually, I mean, that's why, like, for me, it can jump from thing to thing until I realized some of those things that I was trying to get away from and understanding my behaviors. Then I was able to actually see them, identify them, and make some changes. But yeah, I think a lot of people are stuck at home and they're left with their thoughts. And that's the first time that, I mean, because we're so lucky that we have all these devices and outlets and sports and all these things which can distract us, and we can use as a distraction method. Um, so it's very difficult. And I was early on, I was concerned. I mean, I was talking to my wife. I'm like, I'm really concerned about the mental health part of it as much, or if not more than the physical. I mean, and that's not downplaying the physical health
sure.
side of it, but to realize, having, like you say, having gone through what I have gone through and knowing how difficult that journey has been and some of the things that I've had to dig into and address. um, I don't know that as a culture, I don't think we've been taught. I mean, you talked earlier about, like, we just don't have the tools. Like, we never were taught how to do these things, and it's a skill that I think is a very teachable skill. um, And I think the more that we do that and talk, we're talking more about mental health, and you're seeing it in sports, you're seeing it in Hollywood, you're seeing it in all these places. And hopefully the next generations and generations to follow will have some of this education and insight early on, so that they can see these things before they become these massive issues.
Yeah, I think one of my friends said to me before, why did you never talk to me about your problems? And my answer was quite simple. I didn't know how.
Yeah.
I actually did not know how to open my mouth and say, this is how I feel. These are the problems I have. Please help me.
Yeah. And we don't, and even having gone through what we've gone through, it's hard to have that conversation with other people. I mean, your friend, that obviously he had gone through his struggles. He saw in you, probably himself, saw a lot of those traits and said, you know what, how do I say something? How do I help?
Yeah.
Like we don't know, and we're all learning and practicing it, and it's difficult, and it's tough to see somebody that you care about struggle. And hopefully, like I said, the more that I'm a firm believer, I mean, these things multiply. I mean, they have compound interest. Each conversation like this that happens, and then all of a sudden 100 people listen, 500 people listen, 1,000 people listen, and then those people can go and have a conversation, and they have a conversation. Like, it can spread, and we can do some really cool things. And that's why I'm bullish on the internet. I mean, you're sitting in the UK, I'm sitting here in Akron, Ohio, and we're having this conversation, which is fantastic. And if we just embrace these opportunities that we have and use them, the tools to I mean, people give social media a bad name because they see the negative side, but it can be just as positive, and it's all in how we use it.
These guys we've been talking to in San Fran have been fantastic. And these guys, some of them have been around recovery for 40, 50 years. And they have never been in a UK meeting or a support group or anything like that. And they're absolutely over the moon that this pandemic has somehow brought us together. And they're like, I can't believe you are in England and I'm here and we're talking. This is just unbelievable. These guys are in their 70s, and it makes their day.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful thing to see. I'm encouraged and optimistic. We're going to continue to see more and more of it, because at the end of the day, I mean, I see like how you feel. I know how I feel. And like, that stuff's contagious. People want to feel those things. And so it's the more that we try these things and do these things, and everybody else tries them. I don't know, I'm optimistic. I'm always a glass half full. That got me in trouble with gambling, but in life, it's usually a pretty good thing. So.
That's fantastic.
Well, friend, I've appreciated it. This has been enjoyable.
Thanks very much for having me, and we'll keep in touch.
We'll do it again.
Thanks a lot, Jamie.
Thanks, Matt. I want to thank Matt for coming on and sharing his story. That was awesome stuff. If you would like to thank Matt as well, you can go check him out on Instagram at Stinking Thinking. I'll link that up in the show notes. But again, that's at Stinking Thinking on Instagram. And from what I hear, there may be a podcast in the near future coming from Matt. So I look forward to checking that out as well. So follow along Matt on Instagram, and I hope he has a podcast coming out soon. I love podcasts, obviously, so I can't wait to check his podcast out. Finally, remember, Matt and I are not doctors. We're not attorneys. We're not financial planners. We're not any of those things with letters before or after our names. We're just a couple of guys that had a gambling problem that share our story with the hope of helping somebody. So please go definitely get professional help. And finally, music for the show is something elated by Broke for Free and is licensed under the Creative Commons license. That's all I've got for you. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.